automated podcast.
Welcome to Automated. I'm your host, Mark Verbenkov, and in this weekly podcast, we will be exploring the impact of emerging technology on jobs, society, as well as us, with business and technology leaders, researchers, and independent professionals across the world. Okay, so just a little bit of housekeeping before we start with the episode today that will discuss 5G. So if you've been listening to the podcast for the last year or so, you know that August is typically a little bit of a break. So I'll be going on the third section of the Pyrenees GR11 trek that I'll be doing for the last half of August. So I'll need to prepare for that for a little bit. So yeah, there won't be any podcasts throughout August, but I already have a couple of very interesting ones lined up that will be published in September. So the podcast will have a break throughout August, and we'll come back in September with some interesting ideas on autonomous vehicles and some other interesting ones that I won't talk about yet. So with that out of the way, we can talk about the podcast today, which is focusing on 5G and whether or not it'll bring about another wave of automation technologies. So over the past few years, 5G has really been quite a contentious and controversial topic. And I think one of the main reasons for this is that issues such as like health concerns to the economic potential to even wild conspiracy theories are all kind of lumped into the topic on 5G. But this technology has really grasped the minds and imagination of many. But as an innovation, it might underpin several other technologies and sectors, and its impact has the potential to be quite substantial across all of society. So looking beyond the kind of typical clickbait topics, if 5G is to be rolled out across a large part of the world in the near future, what are really the likely social, technological, and economic benefits that will follow from this? But I think to start off, we need to really look at what 5G is. So, of course, anybody who has used a smartphone in the last several years will be familiar with the little 3G or 4G icon indicating their wireless connection level and, of course, the speed of transmitting or receiving data. So essentially, each new generation increased the speed and size of data that could be sent. And for anybody wanting a slightly more technical breakdown, as per usual, I'll have an interesting link in the show notes. So therefore, each new generation also enables more functionalities that could be realized by the different kind of devices that are connected to it. So I'll also have an image in the show notes that'll kind of break down the different speeds that each of these different generations will have. But roughly, 1G was a basic radio signal analog connection, and only voice was able to be transmitted from it. 2G was the first digital signal, and this enabled text, pictures, and multimedia messages. 3G had speeds up to 2 megabytes per second and enabled large emails, and smartphones actually began using it. 4G LTE came out in 2009, and this really enabled the app revolution. So mobile video calls, e-commerce, and kind of the digital revolution that we're living in now. Such examples like Uber and kind of businesses on demand or Netflix, I think, are really good examples of what 4G enabled. And then the real 4G was really a monumental technological leap, and it costed an estimated $1 trillion in network upgrades between 2012 and 2018. And this had between 150 to 1,000 megabytes per second. But where things get really interesting, of course, is in 5G, which was started to be rolled out in 2019. This has a 10 to 100 increase in bandwidth size. So this is up to about 10,000 megabytes per second. So South Korea was the first country to adopt 5G on a large scale, and the predictions are something that more than 1.7 billion subscribers worldwide will be using 5G by 2025. So 5G will enable wireless speeds that are on an entire order of magnitude greater than what we experience today. But what will be the outcome of this increase in bandwidth, and how will industries be affected by this? So I think it'll be interesting to look at kind of two different sectors that might be the most impacted by this. The first, of course, being Industry 4.0. So I think to put the impact that 5G will have on Industry 4.0 into context, a very brief look at kind of the historical evolution of technologies and the subsequent impacts on the industrial capabilities of different countries is really needed. So very briefly, the fundamental invention of the Watt steam engine really enabled the first industrial revolution by allowing manufacturing to become geographically independent. So we can look at like moving from rivers and energy producing water wheels to urban areas where factories could be built. And the social fallout was a population explosion that the world had never experienced. Similarly, in the second industrial revolution, electricity was implemented in factories for the first time, allowing machines to be powered away from a centralized hub. So this enabled assembly lines to be built and the birth of really modern manufacturing capabilities. So the question then is, will 5G cause the same monumental kind of socio-economic impacts as the steam engine or electricity? So with these newfound speeds that 5G enables, wired connections can be replaced by wireless ones without any capability being sacrificed. So this allows kind of any previous stationary plugged-in setup to become highly agile and mobile, which is really a key need in the current industrial era. So therefore, 5G may be the main catalyst technology for Industry 4.0 to fully take off. So a significant part of this is the ability to utilize autonomous machines, which require large amounts of data to navigate safely and effectively across factories that don't have a really fixed and easily mapped out floor plan anymore because of all the different kind of changing processes and systems that are being done. So a quote from Mitsubishi, I think, puts this rather well. So because this is wireless, production lines can be rearranged as needed. As a result, the areas that can be automated with AGVs and robots will increase, making it possible to improve work efficiency and reduce costs. So additionally, the increasing use of IoT devices that connect manufacturing machines to a potential centralized monitoring hub could be enabled to track and tweak machine performance to reach higher degrees of efficiency. So these sensors can also be used for preventative maintenance by estimating the breaking point of machines, servicing or replacing them before they cause slowdowns or stoppages in a manufacturing line. So I think that this not only boosts overall success of any operation, but can also reduce the need for traditional human labor tasks and increase higher skill activities like monitoring and data analysis. So that's kind of a brief look at the potential impact of 5G on manufacturing, but then what about healthcare? So as with industry, 5G will transform the way that healthcare can be enacted. The same principle of greater data transmission that will enable autonomous factory activities with remote monitoring will be applied to healthcare. So remote healthcare or telemedicine is already something that many of us have been dealing with during the COVID pandemic. But a powerful democratizing aspect that 5G can bring about is something called remote surgeries. So a glimpse into the future of healthcare occurred already back in 2019, where doctors in Beijing monitored robotic operations in 3 different geographical regions, over 100 kilometers away. So though the actions of the robots were pre-programmed, the live video came in clear without any lag time, which is really essential for real-time surgery. So several other successful remote surgeries in China have been performed where the surgeon operated the robotic arms and blades in real time. The reason this can be seen as a democratizing technology is that even patients in rural areas would be able to be operated on by the best surgeons available. Geographical proximity and transportation issues would no longer be a choke point for proper care. So I think that this is really interesting for the future of healthcare, of course. And the second major aspect that 5G can enable is new connected healthcare ecosystem that truly aligns with the 4P medicine. These 4Ps are predictive, preventative, personalized, and participatory. So as IoT sensors enable machines to have preventative maintenance, so too will we, as patients, be sharing our health data through the interaction of the plethora of devices we interact with. So Fitbits, smartwatches, and smart rings are but a few of the devices that are becoming more and more common to carry that track more and more of our real-time health data. So as the number of these devices grow and the number of people using them increases, healthcare providers will have a more robust understanding of individual traits and needs and physical nuances. So therefore, specific drugs or protocols can be described for specific individuals and even done before major symptoms arise, which I think is largely the opposite of how things are done today. So this will largely take the place outside of hospitals and health centers, but a similar improvement will happen inside. Patient beds, records, treatment devices, etc. can all be precisely tracked and automatically assigned to the most efficient use. This will really have the impact of streamlining the healthcare system, leading to shorter wait times, fewer complications or mistakes, and ultimately leading to a better individual patient care, or so we all hope. So apart from the main industries mentioned above, there are many others that will be heavily impacted, like the energy sector, transportation, logistics, smart cities, and even consumer media. Many of these will experience greater degrees of automation, but all will experience significant change, disruption, and have opportunities, much like the first industrial revolutions, as I mentioned before. So 5G technology is expected to create approximately $3.6 trillion in economic output and 22.3 million jobs by 2035 in the global 5G value chain alone. So if you want to read more about the impacts and opportunities, some of the resources that informed this episode will of course be put into the show notes. So I also wanted to share some final thoughts about 6G. So even though we are now only starting to see the rollout of 5G and the potential impacts that it will have, this is not the final step. As with its predecessors, 5G will be replaced by 6G in the not-so-distant future. It's expected that the framework of 6G will be completed by 2028, and the first 6G products will start appearing around the end of this decade. Full deployment to consumers probably won't happen until 2030 or later, though. In fact, on November 6th, 2020, China successfully launched an experimental test satellite with candidates for 6G technology into orbit. The satellite was intended to verify the terahertz communication technology in space, and this will achieve data transmission speeds many times faster than what 5G is already capable of, possibly up to 1 terabyte per second. So additionally, 5G devices can only transmit or receive one frequency at a time, but for 6G, this wouldn't be a problem. Essentially, you could send and receive on the same frequency. But what will this really enable? One of the most exciting prospects of this is related to virtual or mixed reality devices, which need to process tremendous amounts of data on smaller devices to simultaneously deliver an experience and receive the interaction with that experience. So the hardware wouldn't need to do this processing anymore. Rather, the important elements would be on a 6G connection to receive the computation done elsewhere and simply transmitted to the VR device. The same would be possible for autonomous cars, planes, boats, etc. And most exciting, or potentially terrifying of all, 6G would possibly have enough bandwidth to be fast enough to transmit sensory data to replicate real-life environments, essentially enabling the brain-computer interfacing that has been popularized recently with Elon Musk's Neuralink. So this could essentially enable brain-computer interface to move from the realm of speculation and small demonstrations to practical at-scale use. But I think that's a little bit beyond the scope of this podcast, but interesting nonetheless. So that's it for the short discussion on 5G. I hope it made you think a little bit about how different technologies, kind of these foundational technologies, will enable other more complicated and more interesting impacts in different industries, and that the short introduction about 6G kind of confirms one of these key ideas whenever we're talking about technology, that it certainly isn't stopping anytime soon, and it is just simply accelerating at an exponential rate. And of course, the social implications will follow suit. Well, that's it for this week's episode. Thanks for listening. If you like what you hear and you want to support the podcast and the conversations here, the best way to do this is to go onto Apple Podcasts and leave a review, as it helps the algorithm to reach out to new listeners and brings the show to them. Also, feel free to check out the website, automatedpodcast.org, where you can find the show notes for each episode, written articles on the themes of the podcast, and a library of resources on the topic of emerging tech and automation. Also, if you want to reach out and leave any feedback or you have any questions about the podcast or any of the conversations, there are general contact links such as email, LinkedIn, Twitter, etc. for you there on the website. And finally, for those of you that want more than just an audio conversation, the video recordings are now going to be up on YouTube for the newer conversations, so feel free to check out the videos by searching for Automated Podcast on YouTube, where of course you can like and subscribe if you prefer to support the podcast that way.
The Automated Podcast.